Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. So glad you could join us tonight. Hope that you're going to enjoy tonight as much as I am. I'm really looking forward to my guest tonight. She is Gloria Amendola, who is a friend and amazing author. I recommend highly all of her books. You'll just be intrigued you'll just be so intrigued that you won't be able to put them down. She is, as I said, an amazing author and intuitive with a passion for esoteric knowledge and dream language, and likes to find the truth of things hidden beneath the surface. In her teaching circles, she blends Western tradition of research and evidence with the Eastern path of meditation and going within for answers. She's a Reiki master, trained group facilitator, and accomplished shamanic drummer, and works with cutting-edge disciplines in her intuitive practice with individuals and groups. She also leads international pilgrimages and esoteric tours to France, the United Kingdom, and Washington, D.C. And in her spare time, if she has any, or has any energy left, she does a radio show here on Blog Talk Radio with me. And she has some fascinating material that she's going to share with us tonight. I'm so looking forward to talking with her again. Welcome to the show, Gloria.
Hey, Barbara. Glad to be here.
Well, this last adventure you've been having, I guess, with activating the light codes of the American evolution is fascinating, and you've just gotten back from doing a lot of that, and I think that people will be fascinated with what it is you've been doing and the reason behind it.
Okay, well, I'll jump right in. Just got back from Washington, D.C., which was the last of our 7 stops in the northeast quadrant of the United States. We did have people in many locations throughout the United States, but that's what we focused on. And we began at America's Stonehenge in New Hampshire, a place that is really getting a lot of attention now, and the more technology that comes online, the more they can look into the stones and the alignments. And when we were there, Dennis, who's the owner, retired pilot of America's Stonehenge, was really busy with radio shows, and he couldn't take us out into the field because he had a high demand on his time, that things that just came up that morning. But he did show us that they've just discovered, even just in that site, 13 what they would call serpent walls, which are seen in Woodstock, New York, and they think they might be aligned to the constellation Draco. So that's where we began, and I actually along the way found a really interesting connection when we get into the details about how that site feeds in energetically when we're talking about planetary grids to Boston, which was our second site. Then we did 2 in Connecticut, dealing with a diagonal line that cuts through the state. Then we were at St. John the Divine Cathedral in New York City, in Manhattan. And then from there it was Philadelphia, and we ended in Washington, D.C. I don't think I forgot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, I think I got them all. And so there's so much to explain as to what we were doing, but we were working with grid points that were cited in major American cities in the beginning, and that spirit of the American Revolution seems to be now, as we approach the ending of the Piscean Age and the opening of the Aquarian Age, which could very well come as soon as December 21st, 2020, the winter solstice. I and certainly some accomplished astrologers have been looking at that date now for 5 years, and most of us are pretty certain that's it. So we'll see. And so as one age closes and another one opens, different codes of light are seared into the planetary grid because as above, so below, and the way the stars align in the heavens. Does that make sense?
It does, and I can see the connection also to the consciousness of humanity as well being connected to that, because they're all electromagnetic and we're electromagnetic beings. So it's to reason that when something is activated in a magnetic resonance beneath us, it does the same thing to us.
Exactly, and so I was talking with somebody out in Sedona who was going to join in with some ceremony and prayer out there in some of the vortex spots. This is somebody from New England originally, and so we were deciding, well, when do we begin? And I knew it had to be September. And we were just looking at, okay, so it's a full moon. It's a new moon. Great time to start a new venture, a new moon. And it was a new moon in Virgo, which was important to our founders. It represents the goddess. And so we're like, yep, that's it. That feels right. What I came to find out later was that on September 17th, the Constitution was signed. And that's pretty interesting because many of those delegates, I think it was signed in Philadelphia, which we definitely went by Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell, and we worked with a portable grid that we used to amplify our intent. I have a nice picture of it on Facebook. I was so aware that so many of these delegates were Freemasons and advocates of esoteric knowledge. I know people today, I'm not sure what they think of the Freemasons, but when you speak of the tradition of the Freemasons, they were very much into esoteric studies like what we're talking about, and they were forming our country. And so for them, September 17th had a particular significance. And so they kind of delayed the proceedings until then because they were a bunch who liked to enact certain events or consecrate a building, let's say the Washington Monument, or other things where they would, lay out the corn, wine, and oil, or they do it at a time where they knew Virgo was rising over the horizon. I mean, these were our founders, and this was what they were practicing. They felt that by imbuing this into their ceremony, into their ritual, into their consecration, that it gave it more juice, more power, more spirit of time and place. I'm sure you've heard of that before.
Well, yeah, no, it makes great sense, and it's something. Their beliefs, they were all theosophists. They were all theosophists. And so that they didn't have a, quote, traditional religion, but they had a spiritual cause that they all worked with and for.
Yeah, because in Freemasonry, they like you to believe in a higher power, but they don't tell you really what that higher power has to be. Certainly not in the beginning of Freemasonry. I think near the end of York Rite Freemasonry, they may get a little specific, but not in the general Freemasonic tradition. And so I was like, wow, that's really cool. Not only are we starting on a new moon in Virgo, this is when the founders, 38 of them in Philadelphia signed the Constitution, and that was huge because that's when we became independent and free and became a nation. So I thought, wow, this, the Spirit's with us for sure. And then when I dug deeper as to, okay, what was so important that they would delay the signing of the Constitution? And of course, you always look back to the ancient world. And in the ancient world, much of Freemasonry rests upon the mysteries of Demeter and the ceremonies that used to be held in ancient Greece on September 17th. And they were really secretive, and they involved a symbolic death and rebirth experience. And it was important to the Masons, and also signing the Constitution on that day, because it represented the death of our country as a colony and its birth as an independent nation, which was a huge thing in the world. It representing the death of tyranny and the birth of liberty. I mean, we take that a little bit for granted these days, but that was huge. So they hearkened back to those ancient rites of Eleusis, the Eleusinian mysteries, and they incorporated that as they often did. So it really was very important. And I had no idea, really, other than the new moon when we started out, which was at America's Stonehenge, that there was so much intent and symbolism behind it. So that's always a good sign when you're beginning on a journey and you're going to do simple ceremony and prayer with good intent along the way. So the way I see it now is that obviously we're not fighting a revolutionary war, but we're going through such a period of rapid change, technology, in our world, the pandemic, everything we're facing. But it's really, it's a time of real spiritual leaping and evolution. And if the Piscean age is truly coming to an end, which it feels like to me, and Aquarius is coming online, it's a whole different vibe.
Oh, absolutely, and I've spoken in my stuff in my on the website, the predictions that basically the world, especially the United States, is going through a birthing process. And
yes.
Anyone who has had or been around anybody who's having a baby understands that birthing is painful, frightening, yet at the end of the process you have magic. So
yes.
What we're going through at this point in time is part of that birthing process. And, people are saying, when are we going to get back to normal? And I keep saying that normal is gone. We have to establish a new normal.
Right.
So don't look to return to something that's past. Look to create something in the future.
Yeah. Well, that's what we were trying to do with our simple prayer. We were just trying to envision that and what that looks like now going forward, what we want that to be. But before, I go too far off into that in ceremony, I'd like to explain to the listeners how I see the grids and how, with all the time I spent in France and England in particular, some in Scotland for sure, very, very ancient actually, how they were using the grids for initiation practices, for consciousness raising, and I'm sure there's probably some aspects of this that I still myself haven't figured out. I mean, we're all still trying to figure out what the Knights Templar were really up to, right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we still are. It's just so amazing. But before we go down that awesome place, I see the grids, this whole planetary grid network, it's living, it's conscious, and it's encoded, I believe, truly mathematically. But a lot of people feel it holds blueprints or original instruction for our spiritual evolution. And that's kind of what some people think about the crop circles in Wiltshire in England, that there really is, at least in some of them, embedded codes, for some mathematical, and they're trying to help us, with the makers of them, not the fake ones, but the real ones. They're trying to help us with that evolution. They're seeding in the design, I believe, aspects of memory of our next best version of ourselves, if you will.
Yeah, I would go along with that. I truly believe that we have the blueprint inside, and we just have to get the ego out of the way to allow it to manifest.
I agree with that, and I feel that when we have it in us, like, Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, and when we end up at a site like Stonehenge or Avebury or Rennes-le-Château, so many different places, when we're in the presence of the golden mean, that measurement that our body recognizes because it's within us. We were talking at one point about the Hermetic principle, as above, so below, as within, so without. And, our body feels that template in nature, and that's why it feels generally so good to be in nature, because it's based on Fibonacci sequences and math and a feminine archetype, and you can breathe. It's just funny what our body, both inside and biologically, what it recognizes and what happens when the two align.
Yeah, no, it is magical when you have one of those aha moments and you don't know where it comes from, and often it's even a past life memory that kind of jars you into an awakening. And so many people have those moments and just kind of shrug it off, but the more attuned you are to the shifts and the changes to your own energy field, the more you're aware of a process that is going on that is beyond your consciousness and into your higher consciousness, which is phenomenal, and it does bring great wisdom and peace and insight and direction and inspiration into your life if you allow it. Right,
absolutely. So we know that the stars are represented, of course the stars in the night sky are represented on the ground in many of these megalithic sites, and we also know that the Templars somehow got a hold of those, what I'll call the ancient maps, and they then maybe put a commandery or a little chapel. You see this in France a lot, but even in certain areas of England, and they're very well preserved in England, not so much in France, because the Inquisition and the Albigensian Crusade hit really hard there in the medieval times, and really just, I call it the burning times, just wiped people out. So England has a little bit of a better preservation historically, but you can still find those alignments specifically in France. You got to get out on the ground, you've got to walk, but a lot of people are cataloging this, and they were bringing the energy of the stars into the earth and doing initiations on those locations so that we could feel them in our bodies, right?
Yes. Somebody has typed in a question here, and they want to know, is the grid work connected to ley lines, or are they two different things?
I see them as one and the same, that ley lines are part of the grid network. So you have telluric energies, you have waters, you have ley lines, you have nodal points where, lines intersect and the energy pools. So the grid network is the overall structure, and then ley lines and nodal points, waters, and so forth, those are components of it.
Okay. That makes sense.
And it's important to work with all the elements you can, and what you do find in a lot of these locations is that there's normally a lot of underground water. Like in the Great Chartres Cathedral outside of Paris in France, the Templars procured that location and had the Masons build this phenomenal cathedral that stands to this day, is getting restored and cleaned, and it is more gorgeous than ever. And it was an old Druid site where 7 rivers came together, and the Druids recognized that form of grid system, energy system, and that they could work with it. It was like a communication system. You could receive and transmit intent, prayer, energies, thoughts. And so the Druids knew that. It was on a mound, and where the seven rivers came together, that was their ceremonial location. And then the Templars procured it later on and put a cathedral on there, which was, radical in that time, but it was more in line with the times because they always had to deal with the restriction and persecution of the Catholic Church at that time. So and that's just, of course, one example. There's some work that Freddie Silva has done on Sacred Scotland that is amazing, in the Isle of Mull and the Isle of Iona, and this goes even much further back to the Templars. It goes to an ancient culture that knew how to map those islands and work with triangles. They often triangulate energies in the earth, massive amounts of water, stone, and they would have, like, let's say their initiates cross under Mull at certain times of the year. There was a functioning tunnel. I think it's in disrepair now, and they would come out the other side of the island as Venus rose on the spring equinox, which was always a sign to them of the risen initiate. Like, you made it, you succeeded, the sun has risen, Venus is there, and yay, let's celebrate. You made it through your initiation.
Wow.
It's extraordinary stuff. I mean, the better we get, the more technology and software and brilliant minds that really drill down on this stuff. You can, like, as an intuitive, when I went to Mull, I went looking for the little church that has the very famous stained glass window of Jesus and Mary Magdalene doing the Celtic hand fasting in the window, and Magdalene was pregnant in the depiction. It's a beautiful window. They're holding right hand to right hand, and it's the aura behind Yeshua shows him as a Nazarene. Whoever had that window commissioned, and it was in the early 1900s, they knew the alternative stories. So we did find it, and we were able to really spend some time there, and it's extraordinarily remote. Like, why would someone do that in such a remote area? But long and short of it, there it was. And so when I was on Mull, I could feel the guardians everywhere, and I knew there was a Templar imprint. And lo and behold, when I watched Freddie Silva's DVD on Sacred Scotland, he talked about on Mull, there was this ancient tower of possibly a church that the Templars had built on Mull, and they had all kinds of incredible alignments: winter solstice, summer, Venus, the rising sun. It's just extraordinary. And they were using the energy of the earth that the ancients, somehow they figured out that the ancients had already mapped out for them.
Wow. That's amazing.
It's amazing. And, I've stuck with this now for 20 years because I have been so deeply fascinated as to how in the 1100s, 1200s, 1300s, they could have had all this knowledge. And how they were working with the grids, and how they seemed to be working with the grids in highly energetic points on the earth with an intent to help humanity awaken.
Well, I think part of what's happening is that there is so much technology out there today that in those, if you go back in time, they didn't have, the electronics. They didn't have a lot of the stuff that is in the atmosphere. So people were able to more clearly sense and feel areas of the resonance and areas where there was something going on. And today, if you walk across or if you walk near some of these sites, you can feel the hairs on your arm stand up. You know that there's an energetic there, but if you're not really shutting out all of the technology and allowing yourself to be one with the environment, you miss it totally. And it is a shame because it is so definitely there and so vibrantly alive still.
It really is, and there's something that when we get to because I'm going to discuss some of the individual points and what happened, but when I reviewed the Federal Triangle in Washington, D.C., I'll explain why I did that, and I think you'll really appreciate that, Barb, because you're very interested in the Rennes-le-Chateau area. The author, who's a professor down there, kind of makes that point. In order for him to verify the stars in the Federal Triangle, he literally had to drive 50 miles, he and his wife, out of D.C. and get to a darkened area where they could actually see the stars.
Yeah, no, it's to me it's amazing. If you know it's there, you can become more and more aware of it. But if you don't know it's there, you can miss it so easily. It's so sad because we have given up so many of our powers to technology, which is such a shame because, we have those abilities and those technologies inside of us. And, to not be able to utilize them and experience them is a very sad thing.
Well, I think in our modern world, we see technology becoming more intuitive, and it's really interesting to watch some of that, and yet we don't realize we're just as intuitive, if not more. But our world has not, we'll just say America, it hasn't supported that intuitive skill set. It's ridiculed it and poo-pooed it, and all the while the government has been using it to find out more how to weaponize it or utilize it for remote viewing or, understanding the capabilities. I don't know if I mentioned on one of the shows, I think I did, that my son had actually found a declassified document by the government, United States government, and it was written for Army intelligence in 1987, and it was marked to be declassified, but it wasn't until more recently. And it talks all about consciousness and our consciousness with the cosmos. I mean, I have it. It's an unbelievable document. It's I think it's over 20 pages, and I read it a couple of times. And so if we knew our government was doing things like that early on, we would have probably developed in that way more fully. And there are those of us who made those choices and did do it anyway. But, we did it at the expense of people laughing at us and making fun of us and ridiculing us and saying we were frauds and phonies and so on and so forth. And yet, there again, our own government is actively interested in what consciousness can do on the earth. And they knew in 87 that there was a heartbeat of Mother Earth, Schumann resonance, but they also knew that if you entrained with the magnetic field of Earth, you could then work even further and entrain with the cosmos and download information. They knew this in 1987. So for anybody who thinks, well, this is just kind of crazy, I mean, yeah, I could get into what the Templars were doing, but is there really a consciousness body? And is there an interplay between us and it on all these levels? And by working together or in training our hearts, let's say, we can actually support a consciousness evolution as conduits for these mathematically encoded blueprints that evolve, in my opinion, help evolve humanity.
Totally agree.
So it's really fascinating that, some of these documents actually are getting declassified because looky here. Look at what we have. Here we go. They wanted to tell us we were crazy, but all along we were sensing, we were intuiting. And so I think that if people, and I think in the coming time now, the Aquarian age will be more intuitive as much as it's technological. And I think people will turn to that more and more and get back into, at least I think more and more people will, because not only will it provide a better rhythm for life, it's actually probably really good for the body because it can probably help eliminate a whole lot of stress if you're in flow with that kind of energy rather than resisting it or pushing it away, or you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. No, I think that I've been part of that circle where, if people knew what I did or what I believed in, when I started teaching, I would have lost my job.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have put up with it. And I find it fascinating today that so much is just common knowledge, and people just sort of say, well, that's nice, and that's it. It's not, oh, my God, you're crazy, or you're a witch. It's, well, that's interesting. I've had a few experiences, too. I mean, it's come so full circle that it's just unbelievable, and I think delightful. It's going to be interesting to see how far it goes.
I think it's going to go pretty far because, having done this for as long as I have as well, I can see when I do a circle or a presentation now, as opposed to even 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago, people are coming in so much more informed and really curious, and that's a good thing. I've never seen more people awake with questions like, is this true or is that true? What do you think about this? They're very, they become smarter and smarter questions, and that tells me there's a lot of curious people out there who want to understand this stuff.
Oh, that's very true, and I think it's a good time to become curious, and it's a good time to start using the gifts that you have inside. I mean, it's not strange magic. It's something that is common to everyone, and the more you use it, the better it gets, the more accurate you get, and the more you're able to utilize that in your own development, in your own search for awareness, and whatever your journey is, whatever direction you're meant to go in.
Yeah. Well, I think plenty of people realize that what we've been doing for a long time has run its course, most of it. I mean, there's probably certain things that you carry forward from age to age, I guess, but, things that were important for us to experience and learn about in the Piscean age, and of course there's cycles within cycles, but even if we look at the last 2,000 years, one of the real negative aspects of the Piscean age was power over, and in power over, religion can flourish or grow. But now people seem to be, and if people are still, have religion, that's fine, that's their choice. But it's nice to have the choice. And a lot of people don't relate to religion, but they relate to spirituality. And I think that's something that will grow in the Aquarian age because it's a bit freer. It's more of that Gnostic direct experience rather than somebody telling you it's got to sound like this and look like this or you're going to hell. I think we're kind of outgrowing that.
Thank heavens.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. And, I've been through that too where if you don't do it my way, it won't work. And excuse me. And that's not true. Everybody has their own way, their own manner, and they find what's appropriate for them, and that's what's right for them.
And that's where the innovation, I think, will come with the problems that we're faced with in our world on so many levels, breakdown of healthcare systems, climate changing, water rising, different things that have to be addressed and dealt with, no matter what they are, farming, food supplies. I think this pandemic is really making us aware of how interconnected everything is, and so therefore, there must be there must be innovation. I mean, just to even deal with the issues with water, let's say. How we use water. Is it clean water? Things like that. I was really thrilled that along the way we just saw a lot of bees. The bee is a symbol of the bloodline, the Merovingians, the fleur-de-lis, the bee. And so and of course they're in distress. And so it was really nice when because thank God for the pandemic, the weather was beautiful, and we gathered in circle with distancing outside, and it was perfect. And the weather really complied, and there were so many little, bees that came along and just, buzzed and hummed, and I was so grateful to see them because, it's another issue that we face. So I think all these different ideas and this diversity is what will really spawn the innovation that we need to move forward. So our goal was to say a simple prayer, do some drumming, and interact with the grid and understanding it's alive and conscious, and putting forth a good vibe into the earth, and realizing how people are struggling, how the earth is struggling, and just trying to find, to offer healing and to offer, again, a simple prayer. And just, I love to drum on the earth. I love to sit on the ground and drum on the earth. So it was, it was that simple all along the way. And some of the people that we met and some of the experiences were unbelievable. So here's one for your audience. We were in America's Stonehenge, and that's where we began on September 17th. And the next day we went to Boston, to a very important place to me, the obelisk at the Bunker Hill Monument in Boston, beautiful neighborhood. And we got parked right in front of it, and we go up to the top, and I tell the guard, somebody who's walking around to, make sure people are behaving, and I go over and I say to him, my friends and I are going to do a little ceremony. We're going to say a little prayer. We're going to drum. We're going to take out a few crystals. I hope you're okay with that. I just wanted to let you know. And instead of somebody saying, well, blah, 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 he was like, oh, my God, we're so glad you're here. We need help. This world needs help. And it was as simple as that. And so he said, I'll let the person who's going to walk around, because they take shifts, and nobody bothered us, and it was a neighborhood kind of thing, and we work with the energies in that location. And I kept saying to the group, as I sit on the ground and I do this, it feels to me like I know this place and that this place knows me. And I couldn't understand what the heck I was saying, but and this other woman in particular who has a resonance with John Adams and in Boston, she was like, yeah, it feels like home. And I'm like, I don't know, I can't explain it. This land knows what I'm doing. It's conscious, it's alive, and it knows what we're doing right in this moment. So later on in the journey, I was reading a book called Gaia Matrix, and I read, lo and behold, that in the America Stonehenge energetic dimension, if you will, the energies that land site creates and spins off, it's a very complex interplay between places that pool energy and then they beam it to another location. Very complicated stuff. Some people call it the Reshel grid system. Whatever it is, you see the Templars doing it in England. And so I read a little bit further, and it talked about how it connected, that there had been laid down in Boston a hexagonal, think Merkaba, a hexagonal pattern that would hold the vibration and the knowledge that the ancients and the Masons as well would direct into a landscape to make it resonate in order in a certain way to provide higher thought, right? Does that sound like anything you've heard?
Yeah, that's really cool.
I was shocked. I was like, oh, my God, that's why I knew this place and it knew me, because I was resonating at that hexagonal pattern in that area that somebody in their wisdom put down to make a place like Boston succeed in its intent, in its spirit of place. And it's a very complex system. So it's very arcane knowledge. It's very powerful. And the Templars, again, they seem to, well, they're not the only ones in the more current time, but they really got a hold of something ancient, and they carried it forward. And it felt very Essene, like the Essenes. Jesus was from the Essenes, the Nazarene sect of the Essenes. So I thought that was astonishing. So I finally circled around with the person who had worked with us there, and she was just blown away because it helped her understand one of the reasons why she's always so drawn there. And there was more to it than that. So again, using these energies of this intricate system that includes the ley lines but not limited to just that, and how the ancients in particular knew that this was very, very beneficial for us.
Well, I think also it's another way for the ancients to communicate with future generations. When you think about the fact that written language gets lost and spoken language, gets confused, and yet if you do something symbolically or energetically, that resonates and that stays there in that area until somebody comes along that connects to it, and then there's an awakening that happens. And it would be great to try to figure out how to leave those kind of messages for our future generations, because time is strange and different things happen with cultures, and yet the energetics that we leave imprinted in the earth, will stay and will be there for other people who are aware to read them, to react to them, and to utilize them.
That's very, very true, and I've run into that before. I remember in 2012 there was this young Mayan wisdom keeper, and what he said was that when he was a small boy, that his grandfather would take him to the temples, which are all stone. And what you just said about the ancients leaving some kind of imprint behind energetically and in a temple or in a symbol, in something, and the stone, they always ended up using stone. It holds that. And what he said, and it really resonated with me along the way, that when his grandfather would take him, his grandfather would kind of, put his hands on the stones of these temples, and he would get downloaded with information. And as the boy became a teenager, he was able to finally start accessing it as well, because this was something his grandfather wanted him to be able to know how to do, passing it tradition to tradition. So what you're saying to me is very true, and I've always heard that the Templars also did that. They left things behind, and those initiates that would come in every generation or whenever they came in a particular age, they would then access that, and it would have its kind of its continual unbroken memory. I don't know if unbroken because of the plague and things that happened in our history, but certainly a chain of memory, like you said, and then those ideas and those concepts would be then sent out in any particular age and it would adapt to the age, but there would always be a classic that you could go back to foundationally, and and the great teachers would teach again, right?
Well, yeah, and I think that what has happened is that we have hieroglyphs and we have all sorts of written language, but written language loses its meaning the further away you get from the source. But if you're talking and energetic on a spiritual level, that's clear and resonates to whatever language the person speaks, so that it is a soul understanding of a concept, as opposed to trying to say, well, what does this symbol mean, and what does this symbol mean, and that must say this. That's often very off. It's the energy within the symbols that we have to learn to, we have people who interpret, but they're only interpreting from their own frame of reference on an intellectual level. But if you allow yourself to go into spirit and take energy spiritually, then there's an awakening inside of you that is far more profound, I believe.
That's true, and I don't know if I've ever said this on your show, and I'll leave out some of the details, but I knew years back, I knew a gentleman in London, very bright, very smart guy, and he had a deep passion for Egypt, like I've had for France. And he told me a story one time that blew my mind, and I know he wasn't making it up because he was very left-brained, very much a researcher. And he said that on one of his trips to Egypt, and I think he went about 20 times, something like that, he went into this temple alone. He had been there so many times, he felt like he really knew his way around. So I think he was staying in Cairo, and he went, I don't even remember what temple it was, but he went, and he had been there before. And he went in, and there was this symbol, and it had to be of the bee in some way, in the temple. And he became so entranced by this experience of, so you're saying that the symbol holds magic, the symbol holds energy, and it moved beyond language. And again, this is a guy who's a left-brain, hardcore researcher, and he said the bees came alive and stung him multiple times. And he left the temple totally freaked out because on that trip he was by himself, and he made it to his hotel room, and he doesn't remember what happened until he awoke like a few days later. And, he had all these bee stings, and, to this day he couldn't explain what happened to him, but he had moved in that moment beyond his mind into a different dimensional reality, and he just kept staring at these symbols, these hieroglyphs, and that's what happened with him. And I mean, that's wild, but I have no reason to believe he would make it up because it's not the kind of story he would want to tell.
Well, when Patrick and I were investigating all of the stone chambers and everything, Patrick, who was very intellectually oriented, was trying to figure out what stuff meant. And I would usually just lean up against the rock and listen to what it had to say. And often it was very different from what Patrick was saying, but later on, archaeological evidence, sort of went more along with what I had said than what he had figured. And the one thing that, when you were talking earlier that sort of triggered a memory for me was the serpentine walls. We have pictures of several of them in the area that in Connecticut. And
okay.
And so I can remember, Patrick saying, "Well, this must mean this, this, and this," and I said, this is something on a more spiritual level. This is giving somebody a map inside of themselves. This is not, and he just looked at me like I was crazy, and which he often did. And I said, no, this is not. It's not carved in stone. I mean, yes, it is carved in stone, but the message is in spirit. So you can't interpret it intellectually. And that's the same thing, I believe personally, American Stonehenge. I think there's so much more information there that they're looking for symbology that won't tell them what they're looking for. And I think,
or it will lead them somewhere, but just to a point. Like I remember last year being up there, I was doing a presentation in Maine, and then I was taking a group to the American Southwest. And when I was talking to Dennis, the owner, he was telling me, and I know I was meant to hear this, that I think it was the autumn equinox, setting sun, that stone, he said in the system to which they're oriented, and I forget what that language is, that, they can trace now that this one goes to Teotihuacan and this one goes to this part of the world. And that particular stone was oriented to Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. And I almost fell over when he said that because we were going to Chaco Canyon. And I thought, who would have known that location and if they were ancient, like there was something there before the complex that we have ruins of now, that they're finding all kinds of things. So what the heck was out there, and how did they know that? It just blows my mind.
Well, I'm coming to think in my own research and stuff that a lot of the messages that are in these stones come from before the flood. In other words, they come from that time before our knowledge of what's going on here. So we're talking prior, maybe 40,000 years or so. And it feels to me as though there was a group of ancients, teachers, wisdom keepers, whatever you want to call them, who were here and who were teaching. And they left instructions in the stones. And we have, because we think that we understand the meaning of the stones and the carvings, we've stopped looking for the real meaning that is hidden there.
I agree with that, and I know different researchers in the UK, particularly England. Maria Wheatley comes to mind, Freddie Silva, but there are others. And they're doing some fascinating acoustical work in, let's say, the inner circle of Stonehenge. It's not the only one. And they can tell when these stones get charged by certain magnetic energies, like in Avebury, and what charges inside the circle and out. And they can also find that by pitching certain frequencies in the stones, they form into geometries, right? And different ones at different times, a new moon, a full moon, lunar standstill, different cycles, right? How wonderfully interconnected all of this truly is. And you can see them form, and again, they form different things. And I think in those geometries, because remember I keep saying how mathematical the human body is, and, these temples and cathedrals and the heavens, I mean, in Rennes-le-Château, I mean, we don't even know fully what's going on in that place where, I mean, just the landscape is set up to the golden mean. It's crazy. I mean, I spent so much time with Henry just looking and looking and looking at that stuff, and I think I'm finally getting it. So if they were here then and they were teaching, and some people believe that after the flood, that those people of the serpent, the Tuatha, the Anasazi, the God, I can't even think of the names that they go by, that they would have been trying to reconstruct what was lost, and they were those wisdom keepers as well. So it could be both things. And here they leave these places behind, and to get back kind of to the activating the light codes of the American evolution, it appears that our founders, some of them anyway, were aware of these things and encoded, particularly in the Northeast Quadrant, but not just there. But that's where we began, in the country. And they spent, Franklin and Jefferson spent time in France, and they were looking at, particularly Franklin, they were looking at the esoteric mysteries. Oh, yeah. And they were using that technology to recreate the new Atlantis here, and they were using the geomancy and the grids and this energy in a way that we're just beginning to understand.
Oh yeah, well, even the Bosnian pyramid is resonating a signal, a sound that they've been able to actually record and feed back to it, and it answers them. So it talks to them. So,
isn't that cool?
Oh, there's so much going on that is just so phenomenal. But you're right. I mean, there's so much from antiquity that we haven't claimed yet, and I feel that there's so much yet to be learned, and I do think there are books out there like the documentary Secrets of the Stones. They're talking to the stones. And the reality is you can talk to them.
Yes.
But you don't talk to them in English. You talk to them in spirit, and that's more listening than anything else. But there's wisdom teachings in all of these stones, and especially at American Stonehenge, especially in places where it's so very obvious that there has been intent in creating a spot for communication. And
yes, absolutely. And because I believe all that already, I'm like, what were they communicating and how were they doing it? I want to know all the mechanics, that sort of thing, because I've seen these sites all over the world. In relation to the United States, they're here a little bit differently than in Europe and the UK, but you can find them in the spirit of place, and you can get inside the head of Jefferson, Franklin, and even Washington. Washington was a great surveyor. I mean, these guys were flawed. Yes, people say, well, they owned slaves and they did this. I get it. But, you have to take history for where it's at. And they were brilliant men, and there were women as well, but, brilliant men doing what they could do in their time, because they never said it was a finished work. They just did what they could do at their time. And I'm not advocating slavery or, women being suppressed or not having the right to vote. Of course, I don't believe in any of that, but I'm just saying that they were incredibly brilliant, and they did what they could do at their time, given what they were faced with. And they left a legacy for other generations to take up the gauntlet and continue on. And it's very clear that FDR, President FDR, also was a very high-ranking Freemason and deeply understood esoterica. And you can see where he moved the Pentagon at the last moment. When they were breaking ground, he wanted to make sure the megalithic yard was encoded, and he had something to do, I think, with the Hoover Dam. I think he somehow was involved in the maybe the completion or another phase of work in St. John the Divine. I mean, and we've even found, because I know you've interviewed Janet Walter and or Alan Butler in their book America, Nation of the Goddess, and we can see that imprint all the way up to the World War II memorial, which I think was sited and built in the early to mid 2000s, something like that.
Yeah, that was amazing when the shadows fell and just pointed to things. I mean, there are messages in our landscapes that we haven't even thought to think to look for what they mean.
Yeah, I mean, luckily we have wonderful, people who are so dedicated, and believe me, this takes dedication, where they go in, and that's where my left brain comes in. I read the books, and I go and I visit, and I'm on the ground and I drum, but then I drum, and we might chant something or do a simple prayer, communicate sound. I love the drum because I entrain with the heartbeat of the mother, and that just opens other dimensional aspects of this system, as you were saying before. It's not, there is a linear left brain component, but beyond that is a very vibrating, holistic, holographic imprint.
Yeah, agreed. And it's, to me, I sit back and when you, in this field, you sometimes get to, you search and you search and you study, and you get to a point where it's, aha, I have arrived, and then a voice inside of you says, now it's time to start again. And it's like peeling an onion. You get to a place where you feel, I have achieved not mastery, but I have achieved maybe third grade level or something. I've done something. I've gotten somewhere. I understand something. I grasp something, not so much intellectually, but spiritually. I have a flow. I've connected to it. I've plugged in. I guess that's the better way. I've plugged into circuitry that gives me a greater, brighter light as far as searching for other things. And and always, it's kind of like, this isn't the end. This is just part of the journey. I mean, each lifetime is part of the journey. You never actually arrive. If you arrive, there's no point to being here. So,
right.
but I feel so strongly that people aren't paying attention to the messages that are there that was really left by the ancients. I mean, the ancients.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's time to kind of start reaching for that and seeing what we get. And every person carries a master within, so the message everybody receives will be different. And if you put them all together, you'll have some magic that will be just profound.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I always sit with people in circle at these sites and always go around and ask people, if you're comfortable speaking, what say you? What did you get? And when people listen to other people, they get triggered, and it doesn't have to be, those are all the facts. It just has to be your creative intuiting, because I learned in dream school a long time ago when we used to use those principles to look at our dreams. It wasn't just one thing. It was many layers and levels, and so give people the space to feel creative and safe, and things that come out of them are amazing. They're amazing.
Oh, yeah.
And that's everyone, and that's why when I take people on the journeys that I do, depending on a particular group or group's vibe, if I've worked with the people, and there are certain people that travel with me for years now, and so I try to have all of them in a group because they're just at a certain level, and we could really go deep. But it depends where people are at in any given in time and moment. But it's extraordinary how when you expose people to this, stuff comes up for almost everyone. I don't think there's ever been a time where I've been doing this and you take them to, mathematical or energetic or highly, we call it spiritual, divine, sacred geometry, whatever words you want to use. I've never not seen things come out of people in the process. And sometimes it's not pretty either if it's a deeply repressed memory. It can be difficult and bumpy for them. In the end, they come around and they know they've experienced something of themselves that they just didn't know was there, like you said. But we're at a time now where that level of right brain, intuitive skill set to navigate our world, I think, will just come in more and more handy for so many people.
Oh yeah, and I think what is so exciting for me is that everybody has an important piece to add. So it's not just one person gets a total message and everybody else says, "Gee, I didn't hear that." It's imperative that everyone work together, because the focus of the whole thing is we are one.
Yeah.
And if we're one, then it takes all of us to put our piece in order to create a whole.
Yeah.
So
the puzzle pieces, for sure.
Yeah.
And sometimes, a person gets something and they're like, I don't know, this seems stupid. It doesn't make sense, and I'm like, say it anyway. And it can be such an integral piece when they get beyond the uncomfortable feeling they have because they can't figure out what it is. So, in general, people, when they get that, like, they'll make fun of themselves, or somebody will, tease them and joke with them. But in truth, those are the pieces that come in from that deep unconscious well. I call it the well of memories. And, I mean, every time I see it happen. As a matter of fact, when I start out my journeys in France, we go to this open-air market in the morning, and we look at a St. Michael church positioned right in the center of a measurable six-pointed star on the earth in Esperanza. And it's suggested that before the church was there, and of course there's a river that runs right alongside it. It's right in the center of a six-pointed star, can be measured. It's believed that an ancient temple was there, so somebody was always procuring and working with the earth energy, and it tended to be a more spiritual pursuit, if you will, a more spiritual intent in that regard. And we then go to Mount Bugarash in that area, which is highly energetic. Well, we go up to Rennes-le-Château, get everything stirred up there. And then we come down to that area where there's dubbed the Cathar Lake, and we sit, and I do a shamanically a shamanic past life journey where the drum takes people in rather than a deep regression. And we begin to really stir the well of memories. And sometimes what people experience in that moment, at that juncture, carry them all the way through. The threads are consistent all the way through. And other times, 4 or 5 people will see the same thing, which is amazing. And they kind of huddle with each other all the way through because they're having some kind of shared experience. It's really wild what we're capable of. It really is.
Well, don't you think that on some level people are drawn to other people that have had the same kind of spirit, that not the same spiritual journey, but a similar spiritual journey, so that they can, at least share the experience, and nobody looks at anybody else and says, "Well, you're just freaking crazy."
Yeah, and I think it's in the emotional body a lot too, because when you have people who don't understand or haven't yet discovered certain past life memories, it's kind of like maybe that past life memory produced trauma or grief or persecution, especially in Southwest France. And sometimes it's that resonating vibrational match between the two because they remember the burning times. And that's why Montségur is always a really, really powerful site to go to because of the history there and in the Ariège with the burnings and the persecution of those people. And they do find each other again through time. It's extraordinary what we are capable, and it is such an adventure. And I think more and more as people become burnt out and this age closes and these things we've been doing on automatic pilot don't necessarily hold any kind of meaning. We're either going to get burnt out and so jaded we're just going to deaden ourselves, or we're going to seek to find this aspect of ourself that went missing somewhere along the line, or maybe it was never even fully activated, but now can be at this turn of the age, at this evolution, this American 3.0 maybe. Maybe that's what we're going into. And so moving into each point very deliberately with intent and working with the earth energies, whether completely cooperated, we were able to engage in those 7 locations along the way until we got to D.C., all the while holding that, and it felt very alive and very responsive to all of us.
Well, I think that there is something to be said for group energy, too.
Yeah.
Excuse me, while we all are on a singular spiritual journey, like-minded people getting together create a group energy that is greater than the whole. That's why I love to do remote viewing with a group of people, or past life stuff with a group of people, because you seem to the energies seem to meld together, and that gives you a more powerful energy to work with in your own journey. So it's almost like you create a battery that everybody can draw from. And,
that's cool. I've done that with a group I used to meet with many moons ago at the beginning of this phase of my journey. And we had a past life regressionist, Maddie Hayes, who took us back to Rennes-le-Château. And, of course, I was going to France, but other people were like, yeah, I'll go. I'll see what's happening. I'll take the journey. We all have fun hanging out. And it was amazing, the people that had the resonant memories in the village of Rennes-le-Château ended up later, years later, going with me to France. Because I at that point, let me correct that. At that point, I was researching heavily about it, but I hadn't actually even gone myself.
Now,
but we all decided, we're in. Why not? After that, we'll have a nice dinner, We'll just see what happens. And the people that I saw, there was one who didn't yet. I believe that she will. But it was just amazing, the memories that come alive in people and what group energies do. So, the work around this stuff is really, really, to me, it's exciting. It's fascinating. That's where I go. And I just go more and more because it's really what has meaning to me now. You get a little bit older and you don't really want to do the same things over and over and over and over again. It's kind of like you've been there, done that, and you want to really understand the bigger picture. At least that's me. And, the Templar piece for me is just so important because I believe that there are messages and artifacts that are still out there that went missing from when they brought things over here, and the tribes, the Native American Indian tribes that then protected them for, let's say, the Sinclairs and stuff like that. I believe that as years went by and different things happened, that some of those things went missing, but they're there. I can't shake it after 20 years that they're there.
Well, it's juicy. It's so juicy. It's amazing because you do know that after all this time, there has to be something to the legends. They aren't make believe. They aren't fairy stories. They are speaking of something profound. And
right.
You can't.
And when people, some of the so-called experts will say, "Oh, well, no, there's really nothing there. They were doing this, and this." And I start to question them. Have you ever been here? Have you ever looked at this? Have you ever seen that mystery? Have you ever been on the ground and really looked at that? They haven't. And people get stuck in academia, and they limit themselves, and then they want to say what everybody else is saying is a hoax. But when you really go with an open mind and use both sides of your brain and your heart in particular, you can really just discover some amazing stuff. This is what I'm writing about now because I finally feel like I have an intelligent enough grasp that I can write about it and maybe not offer conclusions, but offer further pathways of discovery.
Well, Bill Mann has spoken often about the Templar treasure and where he thinks it is actually buried, and it's just not time to dig it up. And
he's talking about Montana.
Yeah.
Yeah, because.
I keep thinking, the Holy Grail could be so many different things. Everybody thinks it's a cup or a bowl or a chalice or something, and I'm not sure that's the case. I think that it can be something even more esoteric than that. And I do believe that there may be some artifacts that are buried in Montana, but the Templars never buried everything all in the same place.
Right, so and to me that's very indicative of their Essene roots because the Essenes had repositories all over. They had, from what I understand, they had an international network, and the Templars, their ancient roots were in the Essene community. That's what I've been able to put together, and I'm not the only one who believes that, but that makes sense to me. And we can follow an Essene path in this country, and I believe that the Templars were following it once they made a landfall in either, Canada and came down, or went across and came down, or came into the New England area of our country and then kept going westward. And it's even believed that they had a presence at some point in Chaco Canyon. And I've been there twice, and I've really been mesmerized by the possibility that they were actually there. And then I asked myself, what were they really looking for? Because if you trust the date so far as when the indigenous peoples were there, it's a little bit before the Templars, even when they weren't officially organized, but they were already together as an order. So I don't know, but I do believe, well, like in Bill Mann's, remember, and I think you had him on when he came out with the second novel, The Last Refuge of the Knights Templar, right? Yeah. And remember, that had a lot to do with Albert Pike. Yes. And in the letters in the book, one of them that really struck me, and this is something we were talking about earlier, but when I think Pike writes to the Canadian general, no, I think it's actually he's writing to the President of the United States at the time. And he has just passed his initiations to become a Mason. I will fact check this, but I remember in the letter being blown away that he not only talks about certain esoteric things, but he talks about the ancient people. Like you've now understood some of the knowledge of and the people. Was it the people prior to the flood, the pre-flood people? It was some kind of phrasing like that where you were talking about them being here 40,000 years ago and teaching, and I'm talking also about the ones that survived the flood, who were the wisdom keepers, the people of the serpent, the Tuatha, all those people, the Anasazi, which you see out west, and how they were doing that. Pike actually refers to those people in that letter, and I know you and I both read the book. I'd have to go back because there's so many details to everything.
Oh, yeah.
And they seemed to know about all of that as well. So when we look at Jefferson and we look at Washington and we look at Franklin and all these Masons and we look at Pike later on, I mean, Pike was a character, and he had really good points in being, according to the book, favorable to the Native Americans, wondering maybe did they know where the Holy Grail was. And yet he was terrible when it came to the plight of the African slaves.
Yeah, well, Laird Scranton goes way, way back and talks of ancient cultures saying, asking, where did this wisdom come from? Where did this technology come from? And they all go back to Skara Brae and other places that were teaching centers, and he felt that Gopekli Tepe was one of them, and that there were 8 of them mystery teachers that not only came from off-world, but were not in physical form, who were the people that taught about fire and geometry, and this would go back to pre-flood. So, interesting thought.
It's interesting you say they weren't informed, because I remember one time being in Southwest France, and it was before a group was starting, so I had a couple of days to roam around, and somebody had told me about an old Magdalene chapel hidden way back in the woods in a town I knew, in a village, not even a town, a village. And it was on private property, and she got permission for me to go into that chapel. And I did with this woman that I knew from Denmark. And we went in there, and it was a mess. It was old. It was just a mess. So we cleaned it all up, and we sat in there, and we sang some songs, and I started to drum. And I said to the woman who was with me, because I didn't know her that well, and I said, I'm probably going to channel, so if you see that, hear me, just know that's what I'm doing. I was preparing her. So I did some drumming for quite some time. And Magdalene came through, and I channeled in, and I had my phone, and I recorded it. And when I listened to the playback, but I'll never forget the visual that came through, is that she told me, now this is channeled material, so take that, that's the source. She said that when she lived more outside of the Rennes-le-Chateau area, she would make passage from there to Les-Bains, which had hard to explain this quickly, but I believe in what I've seen on the ground there that prior to the Abbey in the Christian/Catholic religious wars and battles and everything else that went on there was a goddess temple, and they were doing their work. So when Magdalene was saying that, I was really connecting the dots. Well, after, when I was listening to it, but she said when she had protectors that would bring her, because it was back then it was a good distance, and there were times in her journey when she got closer to Les-Bains, near where the chapel was that we were in, that there was a community of what she referred to as star children there. And they used to, like, she could see them when she made passage over there to do her work. Maybe it was cyclical at the full moon or the equinox solstice. And that the way she knew that, like, they would kind of hide behind the doorway when people came, and she couldn't understand why they were so incredibly shy. Again, this is all coming through channels. And that when she saw one time kind of lift its garment, and she said underneath there was no form, it was light. When you reminded me of that when you were talking, and I was startled by that. And she said she believed that they were star children, and that there was a group of them there, and they were just holding a very, very high vibration. And it was the kind of thing where I guess they could put a robe on and take form, but really, in truth, they were light, or at least mostly light. I don't know. It was just one of the wildest things I've ever channeled.
These, I know in the Orkney Islands, Skara Brae, that was a teaching center too, and many ancient cultures talked about 8 teachers, and the number 8. It seems strange to me because I've not heard of the 8 being so symbolic, but the Dogon religion, the Dogon culture, not religion, and many other really ancient cultures all speak of a group of 8 that came to teach, that shared the wisdom, and the Egyptians as well. It was number 8.
Yeah, and I know Tim Wallace Murphy in his very well-known God rest in peace. God, I miss him. Tim wrote in his very popular book on Rosslyn, in the Guardians of the Holy Grail. He showed the geometry that was encoded in Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, and of course Skara Brae is way to the north. And he, when you unfold the Maltese cross, you have, I believe, 8 points. And he talked about how the 8 was a number, and of course numbers could have multiple meanings, but he talked about how it was a number of initiation and it was encoded there. And of course where Rosslyn Chapel sits, that's where the end of the Da Vinci Code, that chapel where the Guardians came to see Sophie, who worked with Tom Hanks's character, of course, Langdon. But that was an ancient site, and it connects back to measurements that people believe are connected to Atlantis, if you will. A whole other story. And when I took a group back there in 2018, we went all the way up to Skye, the Isle of Skye, which is very high vibe. I mean, you can get dizzy. And some people believe that up there, pieces or parcels of land that are above water are actually from, we'll call it Atlantis. It may have been something else, but that great ancient motherland that when you're walking up there on the ground today, like it never went, not every piece on the planet went down. There were some that I guess they say stayed above water. Not sure, but it felt like it was a different world. So when you're talking about Skara Brae, I could only imagine from, I think Skara Brae is still north of Skye. I've never gone to Skara Brae yet, but I mean the vibration of those places and the astronomically encoded alignments in the stones are like through the roof. They're unbelievable.
Oh, yeah. And all of these cultures say that these teachers came to teach people from the different tribes, and then they were sent back to the tribes to share the knowledge and the wisdom, and of course, and the other parts of the teachings. But that at some point in time, they all went away. So
some people, and that there's 2 things I could say to that. That connects to the serpent walls. And one thing I was told by my guide when we were in Woodstock, but I believe they went away because the vibration or the energetics or the magnetics of Earth was not sustainable to them. Just like when our astronauts go out in space, they have to wear gear that simulates our atmosphere, right, so they could breathe and stay alive. While they're in an environment that doesn't support that, it has to be artificially supported. But I often wonder if it had to do with magnetics. And I know that when we were taken to the site in Woodstock that had serpentine walls or serpent walls connected to Draco, what our guide said, and this is just kind of a paraphrasing, that in this astronomical connection between above and below, sky and earth, that these ancient beings who were very advanced could read them and know by the cycles of time when it was a good time to be on planet Earth and when they wanted out because it was dark. It was not of their liking.
Could be that, or it could be they were, lots of possibilities, but it could be that they were here not only to impart knowledge and wisdom into the cultures that were here, but to impart it to stones as well, so that at some point in time, even if what they've taught was forgotten, that someplace encoded in the planet is the wisdom that they came to share and the reason for it. And maybe they had a non-intervention code too, kind of like you can share knowledge and wisdom, but you can't lead them. Once you give them the knowledge and wisdom, you have to leave and let them do with it as they will.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. In my channeling, and some of the listeners may remember, but just before this pandemic, started at the end of December 2019, as I've said, Archangel Michael, or E.T. Michael, Advanced Being Michael, came, and he had showed me the dream, and I later on, by the end of, January 5th, maybe it was even later than that, I realized that he was showing me the pandemic. But I had no precedent for it, so I couldn't figure it out. It was right in front of my face, and I couldn't figure it out. But what he did say, and has continued to say in his, the visions he shows and the words that have been completely spot on, he says, if you stay in the heart, in a vibe of love, of loving energy, we, meaning me and the benevolent ones, we can reach you, and we can offer instruction that will be an asset to you at this time. But if you shrink or contract in fear, we can't reach you. You can't hear us in that vibration. And it's like, here, we can offer this to you, and we can show you how to use this Merkaba vehicle and other techniques to help yourself at this time. But they don't, at that level, they don't force anything upon you.
Well, I think in many ways, the pandemic forced us all into isolation to find out who we were individually. I think it was a gift. A strange gift. But I think we were forced to withdraw from groups so we could find out where we stood within ourselves. And those people who used the time to do that are far richer today, not monetarily, unfortunately, but are far richer and more secure and more stable, because they spent the time going inside and working within themselves instead of, complaining and wrestling with other stuff. I think the whole thing. It's a horrible thing, but it forced the entire world to stop dead in their tracks and take a look at what they were doing with their lives. And lots of people lost jobs, but in the losing of the jobs, they found other ways to support themselves that were healthier and that were more resonant to their talents and their gifts. A lot of stuff was bad. I got that, and a lot of people passed, and that's horrible. But I know what you're saying. I really do. It's been difficult, but there have been little pockets of silver linings where if you were able to be home, or if you were able to be still for a while, there were real opportunities for all that you speak of. It's just such a crazy experience to unpack. And one thing that I found along the way, with the pandemic, I was basically staying home. And, maybe to go to the grocery store or, the post office, but, really homebound. And so I cook a lot, so I don't go out to eat a lot. And along the way, we would catch breakfast, because none of the hotels we were at were serving it, and none of them had any on-site food service. It just really isn't there right now. And so you adapt, and you do different things. So one of the times we were out, twice we were outside, outdoor dining to catch breakfast before we then traveled on to the next site. And I know it's just a simple little thing. It's nothing big, but I hadn't seen it. You tap your phone to this little square on a little
kind of a little metal stand, and basically what it does is it gives you the breakfast menu for that venue, and you look at what's online. So there's no paper, there's no touch. It just, you read your phone. And I just thought, wow, that's simple and innovative, and it solves a problem. Amazing. So there is a lot of that going on.
Oh yeah, I had for when I moved, I didn't know where anything was, so I used Instacart. And one lady who delivered the groceries to me said she had to fix her garage, and she figured she needed to find a job to find the money, and so she did Instacart. She did the delivery for Instacart, and she said, "I'm going to keep this up. This is so much fun. I never even thought of doing something like this before." But she said it's wonderful. It gives me a chance to be out, to do things, to meet people, at a distance. But she said, it never would have occurred to me that, I could raise money this way. And so, so many people became so inventive, so creative, and have benefited so greatly from this experience. I know I spent a lot of time, doing writing and organizing stuff. I moved, so, a lot of it was, trying to be creative with packing. I'm going to have to move about 20 more times to get it right, but I'm not about to think of even that now. So, but it gave me a chance to declutter, to get rid of stuff that I didn't need, to really pare stuff down. And so I looked upon this as an opportunity for me. This was a great challenge, and I thrived in it. I mean, I didn't thrive in seeing the numbers of people that were passing away. I felt horrible about that. But you get down to the bottom of it, and that's what they charted. So I get your point. That it is there are very negative outcomes with this pandemic, but where you find yourself, if you can be present, and if you're lucky enough to be home, or really manage your life in that way, there is a lot of creative innovation and different ways to look at what we're experiencing, for sure. We are, no doubt in my mind, into an evolutionary leap, and that's what really drove the whole activating the light codes of the American evolution, was that we're so close to that winter solstice, and as things are when you do healing work, when you remove something in the energy field, especially, I do that work for friends now. I don't generally do that work, but when you remove something and help people release something, you have to fill it. You don't leave it open, so you fill it with the Reiki energy or the light, and that circulates through the body, and it's healing and it's restorative and that sort of thing. And I just feel that as this felt, and others did as well, that as this Piscean age is coming to a close, some of the lessons and things that were there for the learning, and experiences and good, bad, and everything in between, they're falling apart. And that's why it's believed at the turning of ages that a lot of, and I remember reading this in 2012, that egomaniacal personalities emerge, and it has in different traditions. There's a precedent for this, because it's like planting a seed for the new plant to sprout. You've really got to hover over that little baby for a while and nurture it before it gets stronger and starts to grow on its own. And so in the the shift from the Piscean to the Aquarian age, we were out there in the dissolution of the old, and we were sending light and then seeding a vision for filling it with something to come that would be better for our world, in our opinion. And I'm sure there's plenty of people doing that, but you can put your thought sphere, you can put your feeling in your heart into the mix, and what takes hold is what takes hold. Well, this is sort of like, I know when I lived on the coast, the worst storms were the nor'easters. And if the nor'easter hit at full moon and high tide, it was devastating. And it feels to me as though we are at that period of time astrologically. And isn't this the time in the switching of the progression of the equinoxes where we go from a more physical focus into a more spiritual focus? Aren't we at that juncture, that change of the equinoxes, the progression of them?
The precession of the equinoxes. Well, we allegedly hit that roughly 26,000 year cycle, which is what I think you're referring to, around 2012. We hit a 103,000 year cycle. We hit a 5,125 year cycle. So all of that, all those cycles like turned and clicked and boom, there we had it. But there are some people who believe that the real 2012 is 2020, and that maybe there was a slight error in dates. I mean, the Mayans were, really good timekeepers, but I mean, over time it's possible because you're only talking 8 years. It's really nothing. So we are in this huge shifting, and physical to spiritual could be emotional body to being free of the emotional body in the Aquarian age. There's, that's a 2,000 year cycle. Whatever it is, I know we feel it in our bones. And people who aren't even into the kind of stuff that you and I are discussing tonight, Barbara, they're feeling it too.
Oh yeah, and so that's it's kind of like this is an exciting time. Is it upsetting? Well, if you want to look at it that way, fine. But to me, this is a challenge. This is a whole new age we are looking at, and we're here at the very beginning of it. And like I said before, we're being birthed into a new age, and birthing hurts. Birthing is painful. I've had a kid. You can't.
It's bloody and it's messy and everything else.
Yeah, and yet, if you survive it, and most people will, there is a dawning of something quite beautiful. And like you said before, it has to be nurtured. It has to be taken care of. It has to be gentled along until it can really get its feet on the ground and begin to flow with a steady stream of energy. And so I think those people, and I hate the term, who are light workers, I prefer to call myself a bridge walker, because I have one foot in each.
That's nice too. I like that.
In each word, in each world, so that those people who are in the position that have a foot in each world, so to speak, they provide the anchors, and not that they have to go out and do anything or anything like that, but so long as they stay stable, they create a well of stability that will kind of merge out. And you never know who's a bridge walker. You just don't know. But
don't know.
But there are enough of them out there so that I really believe that their energy is moving out there slowly, and at some point will merge to create that atmosphere that is nurturing enough for a new age to begin to grow. And so, I feel that it's there, and I feel that many more people are awakening, and I just feel at this point with what I've learned, left brain, right brain, heart-centered, the combination of all of it is I just feel that for me, I'm just speaking for me, I've been privy to, as a double Aquarian, to be, a little ahead of the curve a little bit and see things and put the pieces together so that whether it's a journey, deep in the wood in England or Southwest France or Scotland or, Washington, D.C. or wherever, it's going to take me to Ireland yet and Portugal and Spain and uncovering those mysteries. But I believe that it's so important to put our voice in the mix because with time and with commitment,
wisdom is there if you choose that pathway. And I think a lot of people now waking up are barraged and bombarded with a lot of false information as well, because, again, at these times of the shift of the ages, it's so vulnerable that if you can have people believing stuff that has absolutely no basis in any kind of fact at all, or underpinning of the ancient mysteries and foundational initiation and cultures and timelines and peoples and what that all is. So I'm excited to not only be doing the things that we were talking about tonight, but also I, along with a few people, are creating a digital library where we're going to offer for free certain sources on certain topics weaved throughout the Grail mystery to begin to help people have a focus on, if you really want to learn about this, we recommend this book here. This is forget a lot of junk that's out there. This is your good, solid foundational piece, and it's free. They could take it or leave it. And then more things as COVID, at some point COVID will go away. Maybe the end of next year, it'll be lessened enough to where we can move about much more again and show people and bring people to these places to assist, because this awakening, just like you were saying at the beginning of the show, we're never going back to normal. It's a new normal, and we're defining that right now. And so I'm excited to facilitate and create space for people to begin to experience this in a much different way. That's kind of cool. It's adventure and it's mystery and it's cool, and there's so many interesting things you can do along the way. So I'm excited. I didn't even know I was going to talk about the library, but it is coming. It's going to be launched hopefully by the end of the year. I think we'll have it all together technology-wise, and again, the initial parts of it will be free for people. And then at some point when we can resume in-person workshops or trainings more in person, rather than you could do all workshops online pretty virtually, but the real experience is still in person.
Oh yeah. You mentioned a lot of areas that you've gone and you've taken tours to. Two names I kept hearing when you were mentioning them that I didn't hear you mention. One was Malta and the other was Santorini. Are those places that you might be going?
I don't feel the pull to go to Santorini, although it seems spectacular, but I do feel the pull to go to Malta. And I was going to go a few years ago because I think you've had Glenn Kreisberg on in his book Spirit in Stone. Glenn was part of an archaeoacoustic group that did research and presentations there in 2014. And Glenn, actually, for anyone who's interested, has a Facebook group, and you can join, and some really interesting stuff is being posted on the archaeoacoustics, which is what the Malta temples are all about. So I would like to go there, but it is so remote that it takes quite a lot of planning, and I would like to make a trip ahead of time there, and I haven't been able to do that yet.
Yeah, I know Maria Wheatley has been there. And
to Malta.
Thinks highly of it, yeah.
Yeah. Even Sardinia is piquing my interest with what they're finding, not only about the giant culture, but then parts of it that are in the blue zone where people are living long lives too. So, some newer avenues, but I think Portugal and Spain have to be explored, and there's multiple timelines there, megalithic, Templar, and the bloodline, and then, of course, there's Ireland. And I think when those are completed, I think maybe Malta will come in, because I think it's pretty powerful there, and those are big energies.
Oh yeah, I'm terribly drawn to, though I will remotely do it. I'm not going to get on a plane and going there, but to Göbekli Tepe. That's like
I don't feel drawn to go there, especially with some of the violence and tribal wars or whatever they have going on there. Mm-hmm. But I do enjoy watching the further discovery of the layer that's connected potentially to the constellation Cygnus. that's a whole other one we haven't even talked about. And the ancient people that were there, and they're finding it goes back later and later. So I really keep my eye on that one in terms of what's being found, but I don't know that I'll actually go on the ground there. I will go back to Egypt, though.
Well, hey.
I will, because my first, I had some very difficult past lives come up there when I was there, and it was really, personally, it was very hard. And so I enjoyed being there, but yet I was so ready to get out of there because it was difficult, and I had a hard time there. Personally, I was harassed a lot by the guys there. And I'm thinking it's got to be this whole ISIS thing. I don't know what it was. It was crazy. But I think a lot of that's behind me now, and I could go and have a more a deeper experience and a little bit more enjoyable, although it's tough. But I will go there once more.
Yeah, I think that I am to the point where, as far as visiting a lot of these ancient sites, I'll do it remote viewing wise, and it to me is almost just the same as actually being there, and yet I have a bathroom right near me, and I have my own bed. So
yeah, I know. Traveling has gotten complicated for sure, but I still have that urge within me, so I'm going to keep going until I no longer do. But with all that you've experienced, you should be able to tap in remotely and even bilocate your consciousness to these places too. So.
Yeah, no, I've yes, absolutely, and even down to the smells. So it's kind of it's fascinating, and it saves on plane fare for sure.
Yeah, in hotels.
Tremendously, but I think what you've done is amazing, and it just seems to me that when I kind of visualize a map of the United States, I see so many other places that light up that are either vortexes or part of a grid work or something that certainly could be visited and done something with, because it seems to me that you've only just started.
I agree with that. I mean, we did have people in Sedona and Santa Fe and Seattle and Missouri and Florida and throughout New England and so forth. So we did have people out at Serpent Mound in Ohio. We did have a good support system, but I agree. And, I knew that when we were done with Washington, D.C., it was the culmination. But like you said earlier, but we felt, in this way, what we've just done now has just begun.
Oh, gosh, and Mount Washington comes up here, too.
Yeah. So, I'm all in. To me, being in the States is easy because it's the same currency, the same language, even if it's different time zones. When you travel abroad, being home domestically and traveling is just so much easier for so many reasons. You're on the right side of the road, whatever. And I actually love traveling in America. I know people say we're divided, but honestly, when I go out into the world and put my feet on the ground, most people aren't looking to be divided. They're looking for the basics, and people get along.
Oh, yeah.
Generally they do. So I love traveling in the United States.
Well, I think one of the things that used to bother me greatly is when you talk about antiquity, most people go to Greece, Rome, and Egypt, and the reality here is that here in the United States, we have places that are even older than those.
Mm-hmm.
And we have pyramids here. We have sites here that are so ancient you can't put a date on it. And we have, even though the country was left alone it wasn't left alone. See, that's it. There were
It wasn't destroyed, and it wasn't, power over. It was a different model.
Yeah, and people weren't fighting to control it and stuff like that. It was virgin territory that was honored by the indigenous people. And then the Europeans invaded it and ruined stuff.
They did.
But there's there's still memories and energetics of those times. Nobody has ever figured out what the stone chambers were for. And,
I know.
To me, there's so much ancient history here in the United States that is not being taught, is not being paid attention to. The copper mines, 9,000 years in production. Nobody talks about them.
And that Hammonasset line from Long Island to Devil's Tombstone in Stony Cove in the Catskills, if you keep it on the same line that it's moving, which is on the navigational system, it's in that framework of execution, the way they used to do it, you end up right at the copper mines. So those ancient copper mines in Michigan that you're talking about, so somebody knew to mark that, which then became, I don't know how long it was considered native sacred land in Long Island, but where the inception point of the Hammonasset line that Glenn, of course, talks about was Professor Pritchard's discovery, I think. It's on the Graham Hancock website, but it starts on native sacred ground.
Yeah.
It's marked that way now today. I mean, we have pictures of it. We have people that have gone to it, and it goes right there, and it ends up. So even if the Templars or whomever were, the ancient mariners were following that, there's a group that's even older. I mean, now you're talking 9,000 years ago. That's the date for the mines?
Yeah, they've been mined for at least the last 9,000 years.
So that's way before the Phoenicians.
Yeah, and not only that, but there are, who is it? Rick Osman, in his book, can't remember the name of it now, but it's one of my favorite books. Up and down the Mississippi and there's another river, there are what seem to be the remains of Roman forts. And he's saying it's either the 9th or the 7th Roman army went missing, and there is a thought that they may have ended up in this country because Roman coins have been found all over the Midwest and stuff like that. So,
And
that goes way back. So, I just, and this isn't taught in the history books. So,
no, none of it is, and I was actually one of my friends who was with us on the journey is a retired teacher, and she's an amateur historian among other things. And we were talking about, the history that we were following, and how if it was ever really portrayed, like the kids would be so much more interested.
Oh yeah.
And
Absolutely.
We were even talking about most of us. There were three of us. Who had watched the series on Netflix called Turn, and it dealt with, that original Culpeper or Culper spy ring around Washington in the Revolutionary War. It was really cool. It was, I think, 4 seasons long. And, oh, my God, why was I even talking about that? I have so many thoughts in my mind. I'm so excited. I was bringing that up for what reason? There was something I wanted to share with you with that. In relation to what we were just saying. Lost my train of thought.
When Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark out, they were looking for Indians that spoke Gaelic, because if they could find any, that would mean that we bought the country from the wrong country.
Yeah, and also, too, in the esoteric, the hidden expedition of Lewis and Clark, it's really believed that Jefferson knew that there were certain artifacts and things buried, if you will, and people that he may have wanted to connect with who knew certain things. And he clearly sent Lewis and Clark out for that esoteric part of the mission. So, and it tracks back to Jefferson and what he really knew and what the indigenous tribes, and I know man in either the 13th Pillar, I think it was the 13th Pillar, not Last Refuge, they make their way out to the vault in Montana, and the tribes that are there for them as well, who have guarded for so very long. And they do a parallel story with these 2 Templars. But anyway, Jefferson was, definitely, he had a hidden agenda for sure with Lewis and Clark.
Was it Meriwether Lewis that was murdered on his way back to talk to Jefferson, or was it Clark? I know one of them was murdered on the way back.
It was Meriwether Lewis, yeah.
So I mean, there's so much cool stuff here.
There is so much cool stuff. I know my friends in Europe and the UK, when I say this, like they, for a long time, they would just laugh at me like, yeah, okay, you don't have anything old there. And I'd be like, oh, no, we do. It hasn't received the attention. And then when I would say that the Templars were here, of course, even Tim didn't believe me. Like, they were never there. They were already disbanded. And he's a Templar. He was a Templar expert, but I knew. And now the pieces are just coming together. It was secretive, and because of that, I mean, the Templars had a lot to do with our forming of America. The Scottish, some of the Jacobites. I mean, they were, where things didn't work there, they were going to work here. And I mean, we could go on and on and on about the Iroquois nation and how that's connected and how far back that really truly goes. Fascinating stuff. Really fascinating. So we set out, and I believe we did the original leg, which is what we were supposed to do, and I believe we will continue on as well. It was really rewarding to see all these structures, despite all the chaos we find ourselves in a pandemic. They're still there, and there's still a lot of good people on the ground who are doing their very best to adapt and move forward. And I think that's inspiring.
And I think they will prevail. I really do. We're getting down to 4 minutes here. I do want you to get your information out there so that you can send people to wherever you need to send them to, whether, whatever sites you want to put out there. Let them know where they can
Well, I think
you.
the best thing to do for the hub, and the easiest thing is for them to go to my website at www.gloria-amendola, AMENDOLA.com, because from there, there's a lot of stuff, and I have my email address, and I'm on Facebook. I'm not overloaded on social media. I don't have the time. But if you send me an email, I will get back to you. I do try to answer questions to the degree I can. And, it's just like you said before, too, it's a challenging time, and it's an extraordinary time all at once. And so that's the best way to get a hold of me. That has all the info.
And once a month, hopefully, you'll be back here. And,
yes. Yep.
Sharing good stuff with all of us, because you're such a deep well. It's wonderful to plumb the depths.
I love it, and we have a nice synergy as well. So I'm sure once I recover from being on the road this weekend, I'll start to really put together what that's going to look like, and we can talk about the monthly show, because I'm excited to do that. And you're a veteran at this. I'm a newbie, but we'll sort it out.
Oh, I'm sure we will. And I think I do want to recommend your books to everybody, because I know I thoroughly enjoyed them. I ate them up. And
thank you. I put out a play that I did that started this journey, and it's up on Amazon, and I also have it. And it's a modern day piece, but I am also concluding a book that I'm hoping will be out end of October, called Waking the Wizard. So actively working very hard to get that one done. That's my timeline, so we'll see. And it's a lot about what you and I just talked about, like going and being on the ground and doing certain things and getting the right brain vision or the message or the channeling, and then the left brain and what comes in and how it comes together as a holistic experience, and that we need to respect what comes through that right brain, because it has its own language, like the dream time, and it can really inform us. So it's the process of some of what happened to me, and I had no idea when I was starting out. I literally did not. I was confused and thought I was going crazy, and then, oh my God, did pieces come together.
I know, and it's so great. And like I said before, you end one journey only to begin another, which is the coolest thing ever. We are out of time. I do want to thank you, and I look forward to talking to you again. And if people want to find when next you're going to be here, the calendar on my website, barbaradulong.com, will be there. This show will be up on YouTube, and if people check that out and decide to listen from there, please subscribe. We're looking to build our numbers. We're coming close to 1,000 subscribers, and we would love to hit that number before the end of the year. So help us out if you can. And
nice.
Gloria, thank you again, and we will look forward
Thank
to
you,
having
Barbara.
you back
Thank you
again.
for having me.
Oh, my pleasure, totally. So take care now, and everybody, thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure, as always, to be with Gloria, and look forward to more shows. We have another show tomorrow night, and Solaris Blue Ravens has her first show on Nightlight on Sunday, and it will be called Neon Twilight. And so, again, check the calendar for that. Good night, everybody, and thanks for joining.